When a criminal is consumed by bloodlust, it is difficult to stop him, especially when you are only 10 years old. How can one escape such a situation? Will simple luck be enough to make the bullets disappear? The protagonists of the story lived in a secluded house near the small town of Pampa, Texas, USA. 10-year-old Robin Doan was the daughter of Michelle Conrad. The girl lived with her stepfather, Brian, and her older brother, Zach Doan. Together, the couple owned their own farmhouse, and the head of the family was involved in agriculture. He managed to build a fairly profitable business. The children grew up in the environment of a typical rural province where everything is always quiet and nothing happens. After separating from the children's biological father, Michelle quickly met a new man with whom she began to live. Brian proved to be a pleasant man who quickly found common ground with the woman's children. Soon, they married and lived together. All this happened a few years before the tragic events that not only shook the entire neighborhood but also shocked the whole country with their cruelty and senselessness. In September 2005, Michelle was 6 months pregnant. Everyone was looking forward to the new arrival, especially Brian, who wanted to become a father. At this time, Robin was 10 years old and lived the typical life of a schoolgirl, determined and very bright. She was in regular contact with her mother, her brother, her stepfather, and even with her biological father. He came to visit her, and the girl sometimes went to him in the summer. September 30, 2005 was a completely normal day. Nothing indicated blood and cruelty. In the evening, Robin went to bed. Suddenly, she woke up in the middle of the night and thought she was having a nightmare, as she first heard gunshots and then her mother screaming. The schoolgirl realized that it was not a dream but that something disturbing was happening on the ground floor of her house. The girl got out of her bed and ran to the door to hear what was going on, but loud footsteps were heard outside the door. Someone stopped right in front of her room. The door opened with a creak. Meanwhile, the girl had jumped into bed. She managed to get to the bed as quickly as possible. When the door swung open, there were several deafening bangs. 2 of the bullets missed her, but Robin felt they were only centimeters from her left leg and left arm. One of the bullets had hit a closet, but apparently the perpetrator had not noticed in the darkness that he had missed her. The murderer went into the next room where the girl's brother was sleeping. Gunshots rang out. The boy sobbed, and then the intruder left. Robin was terrified. She played dead and it worked, but she had no idea where the murderer was. No sense of time, and she was just afraid to move. The whole time, it seemed to her as if the villain would return and with an awkward movement reveal that she was still alive and he would finish her off. In this state, the girl lay in her bed for about 2.5 hours before she could gather her strength and get up. She looked around. The gunman was nowhere to be found. Robin took her cell phone to dial emergency services. Even that was difficult. She still feared that the perpetrator was here, had heard it, and would finish what he had started. During the night, emergency services received a call from a schoolgirl who identified herself as Robin Doan. The girl reported that she was cold and scared, that she heard gunshots and screams from her family, but did not dare to go around the house to look for them because she feared the perpetrator was somewhere nearby. Since no one had screamed or shown any sign of life recently, she feared the worst. The girl asked what had happened and where her family was. Robin made her way to the kitchen and just stared out the window, waiting for help. As soon as she saw the flashing lights of the patrol cars, she ran out onto the street and rushed towards the police officers. Robin was in shock and was taken to one of the patrol cars. Several patrol car crews armed themselves and set about investigating the crime scene in case the perpetrator was still inside and could shoot back. Here, a bloody picture awaited the police officers. The entire family seemed to have been shot. Brian was shot 3 times, Michelle was hit 6 times, even the dog was shot twice. Zach Doan was killed while the boy slept in his bed. He probably didn't even wake up as one of the bullets hit him directly in the head. Michelle was also shot. She was 2 months away from giving birth to a little boy who also died in the womb. The cartridge casings found in the house matched an AK-47 assault rifle. Such cartridge casings are usually not sold in a normal gun store but are bought to order or in limited quantities. The whole time, the little girl sat in a patrol car waiting for news from the police. She hoped someone had survived. When one of the officers returned and stated that the criminal had long since fled, Robin had calmed down a bit. But now she cried again when she learned that her loved ones had been killed. She was told to go to the station and talk to the police officers. Robin wanted the police officers to feed the animals with her before they left so she could recover a little. In that moment, Robin seemed disconnected from reality as she fed her goats in the barn and told the officer how she and her brother had won prizes in a competition. But at some point, she returned to reality, cried, grabbed the police officer by the shoulder, and asked when her family would leave the house. The man was forced to tell her again that she was the only survivor of the tragedy. She was first taken to a nearby medical center where she received care. Here she became painfully aware of what had happened, and she cried a lot because she did not understand who could have killed her entire family. Psychologists were supposed to work with Robin, but that would take a very long time. It was clear to the investigators that they were dealing with a very dangerous criminal. Time was running out. He had to be stopped before the intruder struck again. The doctors examined the child and confirmed that Robin was unharmed, so the police immediately took her to the station to talk to her and offer her the necessary protection. The girl made contact with the police officers and communicated with them. Unfortunately, Robin did not see what happened. The investigators suspected that her stepfather or her mother might have had a violent argument with someone shortly before the events, but that was not the case. The girl denied everything. There was a theory that someone was involved with bad company or illegal substances, but Robin also denied this. She could not name anyone who might hate the family and attack them with a weapon. She described in detail everything she had heard, but she could not describe the perpetrator's appearance. She had not seen him directly but only caught a fleeting glimpse of a dark silhouette, so she could not provide any valuable clues. The only thing she knew for sure was that the attacker was light-skinned. Only one important detail puzzled them. The girl counted 15 shots and confidently stated this number. During the investigation of the crime scene, cartridge casings were found here. The perpetrator had fired exactly 15 times. It seemed that the 10-year-old girl who was in such a dangerous environment could not have remembered this number. Perhaps she just rounded up because she heard many shots, significantly more than 10. In any case, the police officers were concerned for the girl's safety. At this point, it was completely unclear who could have had a motive for the attack and what the perpetrator's goal was. Perhaps he intended to eliminate everyone and was principled in doing so. Then he would have to return to finish what he had started and eliminate the only witness. After Robin survived the attack, she was placed in a special center for victims of violence for her protection, where she was cared for by her biological father, her stepmother, and her half-sister. Of course, police officers were also on duty there. Until then, the girl had lived with her mother and stepfather. Now, only her father could provide support and help. He came in the middle of the night to pick up his daughter. As soon as the interrogation was over, they were taken to the center. Robin was told that this was for her safety and she was forbidden to leave the organization's premises. She understood this as she was very afraid of another attack. Despite the prohibition on leaving, Robin was to attend her family's funeral, but she was allowed to go there under police escort. People from a large part of the town where they lived had gathered. Many knew the couple and spoke well of them. The loss of 3 people was a severe blow to the entire community. This community was in Texas and was a typical agricultural suburb where a tragedy of this magnitude was difficult for everyone to bear. For Robin and everyone present, the 3 coffins brought to the memorial service were a nightmare. No one could imagine that these nice people could die like that. The investigators decided to take full advantage of the situation. No one concealed information about the place and time of the memorial service. On the contrary, the police officers even hoped to meet the attacker here. If the attacker wanted to strike again, there was no better time than the family funeral. Several officers, who were ready at any time to disarm and arrest the perpetrator, checked everyone present while keeping an eye on Robin, who was surrounded by her father, her stepmother, and her stepsister. Unfortunately, nothing of interest could be identified at this event. By this time, the forensics team had already completed their investigation of the crime scene. It was true all found what could help identify the perpetrator, but there were no concrete clues to the murderer. The data was, however, important. Inside the house, they found shoe prints. Outside, on the house wall, there were tire tracks. The forensic experts collected all the prints and also carefully analyzed the tire tread patterns. Unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA of the shooter could be found at the crime scene. There was only the victim's blood. Apparently, the attacker himself suffered no injuries as he took the family by surprise. The victims simply had no time to defend themselves and fight back. Since there were no fingerprints, it was assumed that he used protective gloves. The back door of the house was broken open, which indicated a burglar. No valuables were missing from the house, although many items that could have been sold for good money were lying around openly, and even a wallet with cash. Therefore, the investigators concluded that the motive for the attack could not have been robbery, but it also did not look like the behavior of an addicted person who was unaware of their actions. The murderer had acted clearly and methodically, shooting the family members one by one, but there was a catch. The deceased had no enemies who might resort to weapons. The police checked the entire neighborhood of the couple and the survivor's older brother, but no one aroused suspicion. In fact, no one had a motive. They all seemed to be decent, friendly, and peace-loving people who were not in conflict with anyone. The surviving girl's father was with his family in a neighboring town, and his wife confirmed that he was sleeping in his bed. And gradually, all the leads the investigators pursued led to a dead end. In the family's immediate circle, there were no individuals who could point to a single suspect. Yet behind the brutal massacre of the family, there seemed to be a serious motive, a personal one, perhaps jealousy, revenge, or resentment. On the day before the murder of Robin's family in the small town of Pineville, Missouri, relatives had been unable to reach their loved ones all day. In the evening, they arrived at their house. Surprisingly, no family was present. Instead, everything was sealed off with police tape. A neighbor told them that a terrible crime had occurred here. It turned out that Orle and Don McCullough had been shot by an unknown perpetrator the day before. At this time, criminologists were still working here. They also spoke with the relatives who had arrived, but no one could provide clues to a possible suspect. However, the most curious thing was found in the house. Here they found cartridge casings of an atypical caliber that is not easy to obtain in the United States. They came from AK-47 cartridges. Just one day after the crime, a report of burglary and theft was filed at the station. Mr. King, who lived in the same area in Missouri, found that his house had been broken into. He was on a business trip in another city. The man was absent for a few days, and when he returned, he saw gun safes that had been opened and were empty. According to him, he had a weapon rather rare for the USA, an AK-47 along with ammunition. It could not be a coincidence. The attacker who had shot the family had taken King's weapons. Mr. King was thoroughly checked and the man had a solid alibi. He was indeed away on a trip at the time of the shooting, but there were enough people in his family who could have resorted to weapons. According to the description, the missing cartridges and the assault rifle were identical to the cartridge casings found at the scene of the family massacre. Of course, a ballistics test was required for comparison, but for that, the murder weapon had to be found first. The entire King family appeared for questioning except for one. Only Levi King, the son of the man who had contacted law enforcement and reported the theft, did not show up. He was on the run. Family members speculated that Levi was involved in the murder of the family. The Kings overall did not give the impression of a wealthy family, but Levi Star stood out particularly. He was a young man in his 20s and well known to the authorities, as he had already served time in prison for burglary. A few years before these events, he had broken into a neighbor's house and after taking valuables had set it on fire. For this, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison, of which he served less than 3. A week earlier, he was supposed to be transferred to another correctional facility. Levi desperately wanted his freedom and fled on the way out. Even after the murder of his family, Robin Levi remained on the run, but at that time it was not known that there was a connection between these crimes committed in different states. Investigators in Missouri were sure that Levi was extremely dangerous, possessed a weapon, and could use it at any time. Citizens were warned through the media, and if they encountered Levi, they were asked to do nothing and immediately notify the police. From D. King's statement, investigators had a photo of the probable murderer. Among the many valuables that had gone missing from Robin's family in Missouri, the Dodge Dakota pickup that belonged to them jointly was the most conspicuous. The vehicle's data was entered into the search system. Police officers obtained an arrest warrant for the young man in connection with a crime he had committed at the Doan's house. The authorities believed his attack was unmotivated. He basically knew none of his victims. Levi, however, was on the run and needed resources, especially a car to leave the state. The suspected young man was arrested by Border Patrol in El Paso, Texas, on the border with Mexico. He probably wanted to flee there. The man stopped and calmly admitted to having a weapon in his trunk. The authorities were interested in this information and conducted a more thorough check, during which they found that the pickup was stolen. Thereupon, the man, who turned out to be Levi King, was taken to the police station in the city pending clarification of the circumstances. The police officers decided to talk to him to clarify the details of the incident. From the beginning, the young man behaved strangely. In just 15 minutes of conversation with the investigators, he confessed to the double murder of Robin's family. The perpetrator insisted that his victims were a married couple in Pineville, Missouri, and described how they could be found. When the officers checked the information, it turned out that the horrifying story was true. He had killed Orle and Don McCullough. Levi could not even explain why he had done all this. According to the young man's story, he broke into a randomly chosen house on the outskirts of the community to get a car. The decision was justified by nothing other than a feeling he described as an overwhelming urge to kill. When the perpetrator was on the property and began to look around, he was suddenly discovered. The door opened and a woman appeared on the threshold, politely asking what the intruder needed. According to King, he was just scared, so he drew his weapon and fired. A man came to the noise. Levi panicked and could no longer control the situation, so he shot him too. Levi was immediately extradited to Missouri. The local police continued to communicate with the detainee, who again confessed to the crime. From this family, Levi stole a pickup truck and drove off, thereby gaining much more mobility. He also made an even more shocking confession, telling of the murder of the Robin family in Texas. At the scene of the triple murder, the casings were indeed found that matched his statements, the same AK-47 casings. The attacker shot at defenseless people, and when he heard a noise on the second floor, he realized that there were other people there. It was Robin, who had been awakened by the machine gun volleys. The perpetrator was out for blood, so he didn't even look at the victims' ages. Levi simply went up the stairs, began to go around the rooms and shoot the occupants in their beds, hoping to get rid of all witnesses that way. Then he went around the house and fled the scene. After this revelation, the police called their colleagues in Texas. The perpetrator's words were confirmed again. At this point, Robin, who had miraculously survived the attack, feared the murderer's revenge, which is why she was taken into protective custody. The investigators confirmed that everything fit the pattern of the crime and Levi was the wanted man. Finally, the tension eased and the girl could breathe a sigh of relief. By this time, she had barely slept for several days due to all the tension. A day later, investigators from Texas arrived at the station and took Levi with them. According to them, during transport under police escort, the murderer described his emotional state. He said what he experienced during the bloody execution was better than any illegal substances. Even hours after the murder, he could still smell the gunpowder and blood, which he admitted was a true euphoria. Levi shamelessly told this to all the police officers. Already in his office, he told them under video recording that he had first killed the family in Missouri. King felt the urge to kill and was about to get a car to drive to the Mexican border. On the way there, he again felt this overwhelming urge, saw a suitable house standing in the middle of nowhere, and killed the Robin family whom he chose at random and whose house he broke into. He knew none of these people, neither Robin's family nor the McCullough family. Levi realized that he now faced the death penalty, and so he fled to Mexico where he would go into hiding. Now the inmate in Missouri indeed faced the death penalty for the double murder, but on his lawyer's advice, he made a deal with the prosecution to avoid the death penalty. King was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole for multiple murders. Now he was to be tried in Texas for triple murder and attempted murder. Here too, he faced the death penalty, but in Texas, the prosecution took a much stronger position and refused to take the death penalty off the table. Cooperation with the prosecution was out of the question. The prosecution believed they had a good chance of forever depriving this monster of the opportunity to poison society with his existence. Nevertheless, hearings had to be held because cases leading to the execution of a criminal are traditionally complex and lengthy. The careful preparation took several years, during which the defendant sat behind bars without bail. In Texas, it was to be decided whether Levi King would be sentenced to execution in Texas or to serve a life sentence in Missouri. When the trial began, Robin was already 14 years old. The hearing took place on the eve of her 15th birthday. The girl was furious when she realized how senseless and cruel Levi's attack on her family had been. He didn't even have a motive and was driven only by the lust to kill, so she rightly advocated for taking this monster's life. Of course, the defense attorney had his own opinion on this situation. He was serious about defending his client's life. Opinions were divided. While some believed King was unworthy of a life sentence, others insisted that life without parole was the crueler measure he deserved. From the beginning, the defense attorney tried to humanize the image of Levi King to soften the jury's decision. The defense attorney emphasized that he had suffered from bipolar disorder since his youth. Furthermore, doctors had diagnosed depression, psychosis, and at one point schizophrenia at various times in Levi's life. He was one of the couple's 7 children and apparently received no adequate love and care. From an early age, he exhibited antisocial behavior, for which he blamed his brutal, alcoholic father and his indifferent mother. While still in elementary school, Levi committed several arsons, took illegal substances, and killed animals for fun. All this fit into his family's life. His parents suffered from addiction problems and did not care for their children at all. The first person who not only regularly beat the boy but also introduced him to alcohol and illegal substances was his father. Already as a teenager, Levi began to consume hard drugs. He grew up in poverty, filth, and chaos under the constant oppression of his tyrannical father. When police officers entered the house where Levi lived, they were shocked by the atmosphere. He had an entire wall on which ceremonial knives, swords, and firearms hung. Strangely, it was badly burned. Although the young man did not always have money for food, he constantly found money for ammunition and weapons. The young man's militancy clearly contradicted the defense attorney's claims that he was a good guy and merely a victim of circumstances, because he was exposed to a violent environment and a difficult childhood. The prosecutors believed they were dealing with a true predator who was just waiting for the right moment to attack. The story was told of a young man who enjoyed the smell of blood and gunpowder, and told it to the police officers who had extradited him from Missouri. The main witness for the prosecution was Robin, who had miraculously survived the perpetrator's attack. For her, the trial was a traumatic event. She had struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder for all these years and now feared that all her efforts would have been in vain. Nevertheless, she was determined to confront the murderer who had taken her family from her. Later, Robin spoke to journalists. She says that when she first looked the perpetrator in the eyes in court, she was surprised how empty and cold he was. Until that moment, she had been angry with the perpetrator and wished him dead, but when the girl saw his eyes, she forgave the murderer. Robin considered it too wasteful to have feelings for this unfeeling story. She realized that Levi simply could not have grown into a different person. After hearing the arguments from both sides, the 12 jurors deliberated on the verdict. What impressed the jurors most was the fact that the murders of all these innocent people were spontaneous acts of aggression motivated by nothing. All victims were chosen at random. The prosecution described Levi King as a villain and requested the death penalty. The deliberations lasted for several hours. Finally, the jurors decided that the death penalty was too much. Thanks to their compassion, the murderer received a life sentence without parole. Despite the prosecution's urging, Levi King was extradited back to Missouri to serve his life sentence there. For a long time after the massacre of her family, Robin struggled with psychological problems. She often had nightmares. The girl could not sleep well and could not even go outside unaccompanied. Years later, the after-effects of her trauma still manifested, but thanks to her family's support, she was able to overcome everything. Robin thanks fate every day for giving her a chance that her remaining family was denied. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.